Today we're going to go over lesson 1.8, the inverse functions. An inverse function goes in the opposite direction. Another way to say it is if I give you an equation, I'm going to ask you to reverse the equation. So if I give you 3x minus 2, to find the inverse, we need to reverse those operations. So let's first talk about what is this equation asking us to do. It's asking me to multiply 3 times the x and then subtract the 2. If I reverse that equation, I have to go in the opposite direction and do the opposite function. So instead of subtracting 2, we add 2 to the x, and then instead of multiplying by 3, we divide by 3. So the inverse function of y equals 3x minus 2 is y equals x plus 2 over 3. You're doing things in the opposite order. The notation for inverse function is f with the superscript -1 of x. I read this as f inverse of x. Now some of our problems are going to get more complicated, so we're going to go through this algebraically, but it's the same concept. We need to reverse the function. I know that f of x can also be written as y. So my first step is going to be to switch the x and the y. So instead of y equals 2x plus 7, x equals 2y plus 7. Step number 2, we're now going to solve for y. By doing it this way, it forces us to undo the original equation. Instead of plus 7 that was given, we're going to minus the 7. So instead of 2x plus 7, I now have x minus 7 in my answer. To solve for y, I need to divide by 2. And again, in the original one, we multiplied. Now I'm forced to divide by 2. Y is by itself, so I can set up my answer. The inverse is x minus 7 over 2. And so that I know this was an inverse function, I write it as f of -1 of x. F inverse of x. Got it? No problems. Let's try letter B. You have a cubic function. So I want you guys to go ahead and set it up. This is y equals 4x cubed minus 1. Switch your x and your y, and then solve for y. Go ahead and push pause while you work through the problem, and then resume play to see how you did. All right, let's see how you did. You switched out the x and y. Then we started to solve for y. The first thing was to add the 1 to both sides. This created a binomial on the left-hand side, this x plus 1. The next thing was to divide by 4. And when you divided by 4, the entire binomial was divided by 4. So x plus 1 divided by 4. After that, you had y cubed by itself. So to get rid of a cube, we took the cube root of both sides. And again, when you did the cube root, it was of the entire x plus 1 over 4. Cube root and cubed canceled, leaving your answer x plus 1 over 4, the cube root. All right, I hope that went well. Our next example, we're going to throw a fraction into the mix because I know Everybody loves working with fractions, so I didn't want to leave it out. Step number 1, write in that y, and now let's switch the x and y. So instead of y equals, I now have x equals 5 over y plus 4. Subtract the 4 from both sides. So I have x minus 4 equals 5 over y. Okay, if you can't quite visualize what we should do, this x minus 4 is a binomial, and I can write it as a fraction. I can put it over 1. Because what I want to do is take the y and cross multiply, bring it up to the numerator. So I have y times x minus 4. Y parentheses x minus 4. If you had had any other number below, you would have brought that up and multiplied it with the 5. But as it stands, it's just equal to 5. X minus 4 is a binomial, so I can divide by the entire binomial. And that leaves y by itself, which gives me my solution. The inverse function is 5 over x minus 4. And I'll write that as f inverse of x. All right, give one a try as a fraction. Work on letter D. Go ahead and put the y in. Switch out your x and y, and then work on it. And when you're ready, push pause as you work on it, and then when you're ready, resume play. All right, let's see how you did. I switched out the x and the y. I multiplied everything by y plus 1. I had set them up as two different fractions, so to get it out of the denominator, I moved it up into the numerator. So I now had y plus 1 times x. So I want to get y by itself. Next, I divided by x. So it's 3 divided by x equals y plus 1. And I could drop the parentheses because they no longer have a purpose. Now I subtracted 1 to get y by itself. When I did that, it's not 3 minus 1, and it's not x minus 1. It's 3 over x minus 1. This 3 over x is bound together as a term. Ooh, there we go. I hope I lost it. Sorry about that. There is your answer. All right, I have one more for you to try. Put this one on your homework page, page 241, and work through number 28. Go ahead and push pause as you do the work, and then check with your group and resume play to check your answer. All right, let's see how you did. This was a pretty tough one. We put in the y, we switched out our x and y's. You had to do it for both of them. So the difference in this problem is now there's a y in the numerator and denominator. So I went ahead and started. I took this binomial. You can look at it as x over 1. And I took the y plus 1 and multiplied it up. So it's x times y plus 1. So now at least I got it out of the denominator. Right, the next thing I did is I distributed the x. So I have xy plus x. And I did that because what I want to do is add and subtract so that I can get the y's on one side and my other numbers on the other side. So in the next step, I subtracted the 2y, so it canceled, and I moved it to the left. And then I subtracted the x, so it would cancel, and I moved it to the right. Now my equation's starting to look a little better. I have my y's on one side, xy minus 2y, and then I have non-y's on the right side, negative x minus 3. So my favorite thing, we get to factor. It's always a good day when we get a factor. I noticed a GCF of y on the left-hand side, so I pulled it out. And on the right, I pulled out a negative 1. You don't have to, but typically we don't want x to be negative in our binomial. So I pulled out the negative 1. Now I've got it set up where I can divide by x minus 2, canceling that, and leaving y by itself. Once y is by itself, I can then write it as my solution. The inverse function of x is negative 1 x plus 3 divided by x minus 2. All right, we have one last type to look at. And this is, if I give you two functions, can you tell if they're inverse of each other? So all we have to do is look at one of the functions, f of x. I'm going to find the inverse of f of x. Okay. So I'm going to, this is y, switch out your x and y. X equals 2y plus 3. Let's solve for y. Subtract the 3. So I have x minus 3 equals 2y, and then divide by 2. Are those the same functions? See how y is by itself now? So the inverse of that first one There we go. Sorry, it's messing up on me a little. The inverse of the first one is x minus 3 over 2. Is that the function they gave me? Are these the same thing? They are not. And that means no, they are not inverses of each other. So you find the inverse of one, and if it matches the other they give you, your answer is yes. If it doesn't match it, your answer is no. So look at letter B. Let's go ahead and find the inverse. And then see if it matches the second function. Push pause while you do your work, and then resume play to check your answer. All right, let's check your work. We switched out x and y. I took the y minus 5 and multiplied it up. I had y minus 5 times x, so then I divided by x, and I got 2 over x, which now allowed me to subtract the 5, and I had 2 over x plus 5. Y was isolated, which gave me my inverse function. 2 over x plus 5, yes, they are inverse of each other. So now you can take a few moments to get started on your assignment.